This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Good evening. Welcome to the Easthampton City Council meeting for Wednesday, November 2nd. The meeting tonight is being recorded and broadcast by Easthampton Media on Charter Channel 193 and live streaming on their YouTube channel. All councilors are participating in this meeting are gathering hybrid of the executive order by Governor Baker extended to March 2023, which allow us to do so. I remain both the member of the council and the public to remain mute until recognized by the City Council President. Also, for the member of the public, please remove your camera for the duration of the meeting unless you are participating in public speak time or the public hearing. Thank you. This meeting is now called to order. Barbara.
Connie Denham. Here. Okay. Salem Derby.
Present.
Omar Gomez.
Here.
J.P. Kaczynski.
Here.
Dave Munier.
Present.
Tom Peak.
Here.
Brad Riley.
Here.
Dan Rist.
Here.
Owen Zarrett.
Here.
Please stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will take a motion to approve the minutes from October 19.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for October 19. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Barbara?
Connie Denham.
Hi.
Salem Derby.
Abstain.
Abstained. Omar Gomez.
Aye.
J.P. Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Abstain.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Abstain.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zarrett.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay.
Yeah, motion passes.
Confusing.
Now is a public speak time. Is anyone here that want to address any concern or questions or something to the council? Now is the time to do it. I just want to remind everybody that we have a public hearing. You have 3 minutes to talk. Please be respectful to the council and to the people. Please just talk to the council. And if you are here to talk about the new proposed ordinance, we are not going to discuss that tonight. We're going to send that to a committee. But at public speak time, you're allowed to address any concern or question that you have, and we are not allowed to answer, but eventually we can address those concerns that you bring forward to the council. Please go to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Bob Sass. My address is 3 Windsor Circle. There are several issues with the new ordinance that actually are a bigger problem than the old. The reference uses for formulating the new ordinance certainly represent a viewpoint discrimination, which when used by government is a violation of the First Amendment. My second issue is that I constantly hear about deceptive advertising. However, no one has brought up complaints of deceptive advertising for any pregnancy resource center in Western Pennsylvania. In Connecticut, a federal class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of a group of pregnancy resource centers. The suit has been in litigation for over a year, costing Connecticut taxpayers millions of dollars. In discovery, not a single complaint was found in discovery. Throughout the Easthampton conversation, there have been inaccuracies with single viewpoint expert talks given at this forum. One that sticks in my mind is the assumption that medical care is being provided by unlicensed personnel. Clearway Clinic uses licensed medical providers and is a medical licensed facility by the Commonwealth. It is now public record. A letter was sent to Attorney General of the Commonwealth dated September 12, 2022, requesting a retraction of the advisory that is mentioned in the ordinance, citing constitutional violations. To date, the Attorney General has not retracted the advisory. I think we all know what will come next. The city of Easthampton is playing a very, very dangerous game trying to codify an advisory as a law and ordinance. In 2018, NIFLA versus Becerra was decided by the Supreme Court. The law in California would require written notification and abortion referrals by pregnancy resource centers. The cost to the taxpayers, $2 million. There was a recent decision in Baltimore that cost the taxpayers over $1 million. I ask that the City Council dismiss this ordinance with prejudice, just as the first Oregon ordinance put a target on the back of the Bethlehems for violence. This ordinance puts a financial risk target on the back of the city. We have to consider the entire residents' population and not the subset population or the special interests of a councilor or two on the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Anyone? Julie?
Hi, thank you, Julie from Precinct 1. I'm requesting that the City Council please revisit the resolution for firearms safety and against gun violence that was presented by Councilor Zaret a few months back. Unfortunately, this resolution was dismissed by the City Council. Since then, there have been multiple mass shootings to include individual gunshot victims. I can't possibly name them all within the next 3 minutes, but I wanted to provide you with some recent ones. On October 13th in Connecticut, 2 police officers were shot dead and a 3rd officer seriously injured in an ambush shooting. The gunman used an AR-15 style rifle. On October 31st, 1 teen and 6 others injured in a shooting at a Halloween party in Kansas City. Same day, 14 shot, including 3 children in drive-by shooting in Chicago. And just last week, another school mass shooting where a 19-year-old gunman who shot and killed a teacher and a student and wounded several others in St. Louis, Missouri. This shooter had been flagged by the FBI background check, but was still able to purchase the AR-15 style rifle he used in the attack. Prior to, his family had done everything right. They had found the rifle in their home, knowing he had mental issues. They contacted the police. The police did the right thing. Since they could not confiscate the gun because Missouri does not have a red flag law, which would have allowed them to do so, they instead arranged for the rifle to be given to a third party known to the family so it could be stored outside the home. But somehow that gunman managed to get that AR-15 rifle back. He forced his way into a school and, armed with his high-powered firearm and an arsenal of over 600 rounds of ammunition, more than a dozen high-capacity magazines, he opened fire in the hallways of the school, where he fatally shot the student and teacher and wounded multiple others. Within minutes, police officers responded at the school and quickly engaged the shooter, preventing an even further horrific outcome. This could have been prevented if the red flag law was enacted in the state. I just want to finish by saying this. No one category of individuals or age groups are spared from this epidemic of gun violence, and no one demographic area is singled out. This is happening everywhere. No one is immune. And in April 2019, the first resolution for firearm safety and against gun violence was signed by members of this committee. It was not racist then, and it's not racist now. There were 340 mass shootings in 2018 as stated in that 2019 resolution. That number is now far surpassed that. We as a community, as a whole, and the leaders of our city need to support the updated resolution and send it to our local, state, and federal representatives. Because I'm telling you, if we don't make changes, if we don't support these changes, that makes us all negligent in the efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I think I saw Judith. Judith? You're muted.
Hi, can you hear me now? Hi, I'm Judy LaBelle from Big East Supermarket. Just asking a few questions about the plastic ban. We have no problems with changing from plastic to paper. However, as I received the reminder this week in regards to containers, we're at a loss. I have been in contact with our packaging supply specialists. They really have no help for me at this time. We use the plastic containers for our hot bar. We use the plastic containers in our deli case. We use the plastic containers in our bakery case. And according to the ordinance, we're no longer going to be able to use any of these plastic containers. So what do we use to put our salads in from the deli counter for the customers? What do we use for our hot bar? The only suggestion that our packaging supply specialist had was to use the bio box, which is similar to like the containers that they use in Chinese restaurants that you fold in on the top and so forth. But as he said, with those, you're using a non-compostable lining in those. So 6 of one, half dozen of another. The containers that we use on our deli bar, our hot bar, are reusable, but that doesn't fall within the realm of your guidance for what we can use. So at this point, I think what I'm doing is I'm looking for guidance from you guys. What should we do? Are there products that are available that you've researched that we can use? He's happy to sit down with anybody on the council to go over this, to come up with suggestions for us. And, you know, we're happy to comply. However, at this point, we don't know how to. You know, if deli containers, if we've got to use paper boxes to put salads in from our deli, customers are going to go down the street to competition because you can't keep product fresh in a paper container versus the plastic sealed containers we have. And, you know, what do we use to package all of our products? And that is our concern. As far as plastic bags, we use the Hippo bag right now up front. It's recyclable, it's not compostable. So I understand we're not going to be able to use those anymore. We're going to go the paper bag route. However, our specialist said that in any of the other towns or cities that he's dealt with the plastic bag ban, they've been allowed to use barrier bags. For example, ice cream, ice, any frozen, any leaky products, we put them in a paper bag. The customer's not going to make it to the front door without the bag breaking. So we have a lot of concerns over the ordinance, and we're reaching out for your help and your guidance to be able to comply with it, because at this time, we don't know how we're going to be able to in order for our customers to have the best containers, best packaging that we can give them. So that's it. We're concerned. We want to apply. We want to go along with the ordinance. But at this point, we're at a loss.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Linda? I saw you raising your hand, Linda. You're muted. I don't have the ability to mute it.
Hello.
Yes, now.
Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the ordinance against the Bethlehem House.
Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Joe Ott, West Springfield, Massachusetts. I've been a friend of Pam Hibbard's for over 25 years, and I found her to be nothing short of forthright in all she does for the unborn, for pro-life work. She's given all of her life towards that as long as I've known her. She's been a guest in my radio program several times and been forthright during the program, been nothing but helpful for all the community. And I just pray that people make the right decision in how they treat this whole thing and how they let the Bethlehem House go on and do what they're doing and help all citizens, unborn and born. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak my piece.
Thank you. Anyone else? 6:14. Oh, God.
I'm going to start the public hearing.
Yeah, let's do it.
Motion to open the public hearings, Mr. President.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to open a public hearing. Barbara?
Salem Derby,
No discussion?
Aye.
Nick?
Omar
Mr.
Gomez.
President,
Excuse me, Councilor Kwasinski?
you had said to do it, I thought you were going to ask for any discussion on the subject
No.
of opening the meeting.
This discussion now.
Because I would like to say a few words.
No, not yet, because we didn't have on the agenda the combination of elected officials and board committees. We don't have anything, we didn't went to that yet.
That's fine. Thank you.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier. Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Jarrett.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Motion passes. Councilor Rist?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is regarding salaries of elected officials, both for the school committee and for the city council. The Finance Committee is charged each term to study the salaries and stipends of elected officials and boards or committees. This is a charter requirement and must be concluded in the first year of each term or by December 31st. Any increase in salaries of elected officials do not become official until the next term, or in this case, January 2nd, 2024. The current council and school committee cannot benefit from any salary increase unless they are re-elected. So to be clear, this does not affect current salaries for either group. The Finance Committee also discussed conflict of interest, and as I study this, I am satisfied that the charter allows for current officials to discuss and vote on increases. In fact, the only way it can be done is in the first year, so there is no last-minute move to increase salaries at the end of a term. Any counselor or school committee member can discuss this, as although there is a financial gain for an elected official, they must be re-elected to be rewarded by it. As for the numbers, salaries for the council were discussed with some ideas as high as $10,000, $7,500, or $7,000 being discussed. As chair, I put forward a $2,000 increase for both groups so as to allow for a conclusion at the committee level and seek full council discussion and public feedback. The Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend these two changes. The council salary goes up 50% and the school committee 100%. The committee felt that the council and especially the school committee have increased work, and in order to attract new candidates, a salary should reflect the time sacrificed for this public service. It is the hope of the committee that the salary increases might increase diversity on the council and attract those citizens that would like to serve but cannot do so, having to work more than one job. Finally, this evening, it is my hope that after public comment, I can hear the opinions of each counselor, and the public can hear that as well. I will then move to continue the public hearing until next meeting, when more public comment can be made, and at that time, a vote can be taken. Councilors, we also received an email letter of support for the increases from a Ms. Deb Friedman, which I've asked the clerk to forward to you, so you'll have it before the next hearing. And the last time council salaries were completely raised was 2016, which would mean in 2024 it would be an 8-year raise. So, Mr. President, I don't know if they want to, but I'd like the other Finance Committee members to speak to this before we open it to the public.
Yes, but first I want to make a comment that for the public and the councilors, that we're going to cover both at the same time. We're going to talk about the school committee and the city council at the same time. And I saw you, Councilor Kosinski, but before you, I'm going to ask if any member of the Finance Committee want to make a comment before you. Councilor...
His name is Pete.
Pete. I'm talking at the same time while I'm...
Mr. President. Yeah, so I just have a couple things here that I just wanted to point out, because we're going to go into this conversation and it's a little bit complicated. So there's a little bit of stuff that I just did that I thought might help a little bit. The first thing I did was just to point out, the last time they were raised is 2016. Well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has an inflation calculator on their website, so ahead of this meeting, I plugged it in. So $4,000 in 2016, you know, adjusted for inflation, does about as much buying power as $5,000 does today. So there's, when you're talking about maybe $1,000 right there is just covering, like, we are really in real terms compensated less now than we were, you know, when that happens. Now, there's a whole conversation about, well, we don't do this for the money. Sure, we don't. But I just want to point out a different thing here, and Councilor Rist alluded to this. We all approach the council differently. And we all, we're on different committees that demand different things of us. Some of us submit a lot of things. Other of us probably put more time into other sorts of, building relationships, vetting, legislation, whatever. I would say that it's not ridiculous to say that over my time on the council, I probably put in on average about 10 hours a week on this. It's not a crazy thing, but I do put in, between meetings, reading and answering emails, doing research on things, interfacing with constituents, interfacing with the city. There's some weeks where it's been really crazy. There's some weeks where I do very little, like over the summer sometimes. There's just not much before me, but I'd say on average, probably put in about 10 hours a week. So at $4,000 a year, which is what our current stipend is, $4,000 a year. That comes out to $7 and something. I think it was $7.69 an hour, which is substantially lower than the Massachusetts minimum wage. I bring this up because we are an economically diverse city. There are folks in the city who might want to serve and who probably do have to think, well, I could make twice as much money working at McDonald's. I just think that is something that we need to point out. In terms of the other thing that I want to point out, just as we have this conversation, I think a lot of the way that we've been approaching this is similar to the way that we approach a lot of the budget. We talk a lot about percent changes, and percent changes are valuable to talk about, but a friend of mine said he heard us on the radio saying that we were going to give ourselves 50% raises. And I was like, well, what do you think we get paid, right? Because if you say you're going to give we're considering a $2,000 increase to our stipend, that sounds a lot different than a 50% rate. But when you're starting at a base pay of a stipend of $4,000, that it is the same. I just think that we need to at some point talk about, talking about these things, like these are the base numbers here are quite small. And as a result, any increase is going to, in percent terms, and there has also not been an increase at all for quite some years. So any increase that we talk about, if it was 1,000, if it's 2,000, if it's whatever, it's going to seem in percent terms substantial. That being said, I'm not married to a particular number here. I think that we are in an I'm sorry, I've got a lot on my mind. We are in an unfortunate position here where the sort of actual study that I, in my day job, would recommend we do in order to have an informed opinion about what a correct number is, we're just not. Our stipends are so small, and any proposed increase we'd be talking would be so small, we'd be paying some consultant more money to study this than we'd be getting. So I just think that puts us in a challenging situation when we're discussing these things. We talk about, would an increase make it easier for someone to cover childcare and be able to attend this? Would an increase make it easier for somebody to do this instead of picking up a couple extra shifts in the evening? We talk about those things. We don't really know, right? There's a lot of guesswork involved here, because to actually go and engage the sort of professional who would go and survey the sort of populations that we're talking about and figure out how many of them would actually be interested in doing this crazy thing, and then out of that, what would be the price point where it would be logical for them to do it, is not actually plausible. I bring this up because when this was something that me and Councillor Denham sort of talked in circles about for a while, about but what are we really doing here? What are we thinking about? And the result, the fact is, there's a lot of this which is, it's vibes. It's not we're never going to have the right numbers to make an informed decision, because getting those numbers would be, frankly, fiscally irresponsible, in my opinion. So it puts us in a situation. I do think that our current very low stipends do disenfranchise a substantial number of our residents from participating. I do think that a higher stipend would to some extent help with that. What number would it? I don't know. And neither does anyone else here. So that's just sort of my like table setting, hopefully to help us contextualize all of this. And I'll shut up now and let everyone else talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peak. Councilor Denham, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So thank you to Councilor Peak for discussing that. I think that was something that we went around and around and around about, trying to figure out what is that number, right? That magic point that's going to entice people to run. And I think for me, I think what I emphasized is that our work as a council is not over by voting on this and saying, okay, well, this is what the stipend is going to be. It is incumbent upon us now to promote that, to encourage people to run. It is important for to put this information out to the community, to encourage them, to recruit people to run. And I think it's also important for us to think about maybe some of us have to step back, right? If we're saying that this is what we are committed to, then that means we also have to make space. And so I just want to put that out there. As the only woman on this council, as we only have one person of color on this council, and I think there is a history of who participates and who doesn't participate. And so as a council, if we're saying that this is what we're committed to, then we both have to promote this, but we also have to think about what is our responsibility in making space for others to be a part of this.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kwasinski?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak about the last Finance Committee meeting before I continue, because there were some disturbing issues that occurred. At the last Finance Subcommittee meeting, we were discussing the future salaries for the City Council and the School Committee. And when I began talking, the mayor immediately protested that this would be a conflict of interest if I spoke on the matter. When I tried to explain how this was not a conflict, how I had previously contacted the Ethics Commission, and when I tried to explain what the Ethics Commission had told me, Councilor Rist would not let me speak. And I was told to contact the Ethics Board. I've done so again, and I was told by the lawyer there that it would absolutely not be a conflict if I gave input, even though my wife is the chair of the school committee. Since the council is setting salaries for future members and not for the current members. The salaries for the current members are fixed. They're fixed through the end of the term. They do not change. We're talking about January 2024. The case that was cited by the lawyer was I'm going to say this, if anyone wants to look it up, please do. EC-COI 87-16. That's EC-COI 87-16, if anyone is interested in reading it. Had I been able to speak, I would have explained that this did not affect the current committee, so there was no conflict. Procedurally, I believe that when someone makes a charge in public against you, you should be able to explain your thoughts. You should be able to explain why what they're saying is not true. I immediately stopped speaking about the subject and did not continue, but I had wanted to explain that I had already talked to the commission. So I don't believe it was proper not to let me speak, and I hope in the future we give people time to explain and to refute false accusations. I'm happy to tell you all again publicly that there's no violation, and I could have given my thoughts at that time without an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Kwasinski. Councilor Rist?
Counselor Kuzinski, I want to apologize to you. I believe you're correct. Although I was influenced heavily by the mayor at the time, I believe you're correct in that I should have allowed you to defend your position. And as I've stated tonight, I've also looked into this. These salaries affect future counselors, and none of us are guaranteed to be a counselor in the next term. So I've learned a lesson in that I wanted to move on in the discussion. I didn't want to have a fight, unfortunately, about conflict of interest. That's my way. But I think you're correct. I should definitely have let you defend your position, and I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I'd like to
Mr. Kuzinski,
thank the counselor for his apology. Thank you.
any other councilor have any question? Councilor Sarat?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say I had the opportunity to watch the meeting, and I appreciated it because one of my favorite things about the council is multi-member representation. And you have 3 committee members. There were 2 councilors participating and some other tangential members of the city. And the exchange of ideas, I think everyone brought a little bit something different to the table. I did want the opportunity to talk with the chair a little bit more about it, but we were playing appointment tag and didn't get a chance to talk, but the video was helpful. I mostly have just a few thoughts around it. So it's really in no specific order. So I'm just going to kind of read those through, Mr. President, and I may comment on some of these along the way. So, one item that was brought up, and I think this was addressed well by the chair and some other members there, but there was a talk about between the work and the scope of the city council versus the school committee. And just to talk about a discussion about, well, should they have the same exact compensation, or should it be different? And I think it was generally agreed upon. I appreciated the chair took a stand on this, that the job and the scope of the school committee and the city council are just different. And so therefore, the compensation should be different. It's not a comparison of importance, it's just that they have different roles. And just like within our city, we have employees with different pay grades. So to the complexity, the time, and many more other things of these different committees argues for different levels of compensation. So that brings us to parity, and I know that one of the councilors did have some concerns about that, but parity doesn't necessarily make sense to me here. In terms of patterns and practices in the Commonwealth also, there's no real example that I could find where city council and school committee necessarily had the same compensation. But equity does make sense, and that was a word that was brought up a lot. And so if we're talking about increasing salaries, I feel we obviously have to talk about both the council and school committee. I think at this point that's a foregone conclusion, but it should be an equitable increase. In other words, how its increase should be similar. And so I actually, it wasn't computing to me until the chair said earlier, but now I understand that he was thinking more in terms of a concrete increase of a certain amount of money for both. So that makes a little bit more sense to me. When I think about increases, I think about percents, although I think Councilor Peak made a good point there too. But I'm thinking about it in terms of percentiles. That's the only way I can kind of think about these things. So again, I feel that when we're talking about equity, that if we look at percentile increases, those percentile increases should be the same in order to be equitable. Again, my experience with large organizations is typically when there's evaluations for compensation increase, it's usually done by percentages.
No, I'll come in after you. I just want to put myself in the queue.
So the other thing that I was hoping would happen, and this is not a knock on the committee, but this echoes what Councilor Peak was saying, that I was hoping that there was some way we would be able to obtain and then digest some data. And so, I did email the committee with a few local communities that, granted are larger than us, at least with some city council salary and school committee salary. I thought we were going to have some data from other municipalities that would include non-full-time city council and school committee. But again, as noted, there's layers of complexity as to what is baked into that compensation. And this goes to what Councilor Gomez said, that, the size of our municipality and our budget actually potentially could argue for a higher compensation per capita, or however you determine kind of how you figure out compensation for counselors, whatever analysis you use, because we don't have staff. We don't have our own solicitor and assistant solicitor. We don't have a legislative aid. And so this goes back to what one of the speakers earlier was saying, is that all the work we do on this either relies on some sort of collaboration among counselors, spending a lot of hours, or working with external groups, or some other sort of aid that takes up a lot of hours and time, and is really all our own research. I don't really know what the right number is, like other people said. And I was hoping that I would find some way to make that decision. But again, with some of the local communities, we know that they're all in the $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 range. I'm not suggesting that, just to be clear. And then just to finish up here, I agree very enthusiastically that diverse engagement is critical, and I agree wholeheartly with what Councilor Denham said before, that salaries they're just one piece of this. Increasing salaries for counselors to a point that makes it feel for people like it's a little bit more approachable in terms of alleviating other financial economic hardships. That's just one piece. And I don't want to get too much into talking about the other pieces because it's not within the scope of this deliberation, but I agree wholeheartedly that we need to have a broader discussion about the overall kind of climate and culture within the city for elected roles in terms of how we're going to attract more diverse candidates. So that's something to talk about later on. I was thinking maybe the CRC could take a role in it, whatever, but count me in. I put forward an amendment proposal that creates a similar percentile increase for both school committee and city council. It's 75%. That sounds like a lot, but as my colleague said, when we're talking about really small amounts to begin with, an equally small amount increase could actually result in a large percentile. I recommended 75%. I submitted that to the clerk earlier today. And then again, I just wanted to echo what other people had said about this. And I just want to add to, Mr. President, what you said at that meeting really resonated with me in general. I don't think any of us do this for the money, but it does require substantial investment of time and resources, and we all deserve to be paid for the work we do. Some people saying, well, I don't need the money. Well, okay, fine, but there's lots of people out there who do need this money, and who at the right level of compensation, again, makes or breaks whether they can participate in our city government. So that's pretty much all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Riley?
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize. There's sirens coming behind me here for a second. So I have a couple of statements that I want to make, and then I want to pose a couple of questions afterwards. So, first I just want to say that I fully support the rationale behind the Finance Committee's request for increasing the stipend for city councilors. I think that there is a power and wealth dynamic at play that allows people who are more financially secure to be engaged in the political process than people who are, poorer or, would have to choose between, the types of employment opportunities they have versus being engaged in city council. So, I fully support that. Alternatively, though, I think that there is a benefit in having a lower stipend than other communities. And my reason for that is that politics inherently attracts people who want to gain power and gain wealth. I think that by having a lower stipend, it staves off a lot of the kind of greed that comes with politics. And so, there's that angle that I also appreciate about city council. And, I'm not suggesting that this is something that we would do, but one of my questions is, is there a limit to how much we can increase stipends per year? Because I would hate to see this be a regular thing, not suggesting that it is, because it's been quite a few years since we've increased it. But I would hate to see a kind of runaway train where future counselors can increase their pay whenever they would like, and if there is no limit on the amount that they can increase it by. I think the role of current city councilors is to protect the institution of the Easthampton government. So, the decisions that we make today, we also need to take into consideration how that plays out in future councils. So the two questions that I have, and Mr. President, I wonder if Councilor Rist would be able to answer them. The first is where is the funding for these stipends coming from specifically? Is this money that's generated from taxpayers? Is there a specific fund that's set aside that pays our stipends? And then the second question is there a percent limit that the city council can increase the stipend per each term?
I know the answer, but I'm going to let Councilor Rist to answer.
Councilor, there is no special fund. This comes from the general fund. The general fund pays for everything. And it is taxpayer supported, along with state aid, which is also taxpayer supported. So if we raise the salaries, and if we went with 2,000 times 9, $18,000, the budget for the council, as you know, we put in a council budget, we go up $18,000 in 2024. Mm-hmm. Actually, it would be only 9 because that's half a year. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm sorry, the percentage, this council can write an ordinance to do anything. If we wanted to raise the salaries of our councilors to $50,000, we could do it. Mayor would probably veto it, but if we had 6 votes, it could happen. And then we'd have to answer to the taxpayers, which was one of the things I struggled with. If we're going to raise the salary, and I'll use 50% or $2,000, when the taxpayers are fighting inflation, having a tough time paying a tax bill that includes 2 new schools, and I just heard that sewer and water rates, because we have a horrible sewer and water infrastructure, they're going to need to go up soon. I have a hard time struggling to increase our salaries too much. So that's my struggle. But I hear everybody. But to answer your question, we could do whatever we want. But we answer to the people who voted for us. So if you want to raise the salaries $50,000, good luck getting reelected, I would think. But I hope that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Councilor Rist. Councilor Peak.
I have a few, or the 2 things, I guess. The first thing, to Councilor Riley's point, having done this for a few years, being on the council and whatnot, I actually sort of would like to see this be regular, but just smaller amounts. I found that one thing that happens is that this happened a couple years back when we were talking about the mayor's compensation as well with elected officials. A year happens where we go, well, times are tough, so we're not going to raise them this year. And okay, times are tough, we're not going to raise them this year. And then suddenly it's 10 years later or something, and you're like, oh, well, there's been a great deal of inflation, and there's been this and that, and we really should update this position. But at that point, the sort of raises that you're talking about look stupid outside of that context, right? They look like they're huge. I think that if it were entirely up to me, I would treat these like normal, they're not normal city jobs, but in this one particular way, I would, most of our employees get a small cost of living adjustment every year. And I think that just personally, that's not what we're talking about, but just as we're talking about it, like one of the reasons that we're here right now and that we're talking about numbers with things like 50% next to them is because this doesn't happen very often. And so I just think that in a way it would be like probably the more responsible way to do this would be to do it in small amounts frequently instead of periodically in these big leaps. The other point I want to make, well, let me just say this first. When I had pitched the whole idea that the council and the school committee should have sort of parity between them, and a big part of that was just a certain level of cognizance of what these last couple of school committees have gone through during the pandemic, and having these meetings that go past midnight, and having parents with some very strong opinions that are, it just sounds like it's been an extremely stressful process. And so for that was like, this is my knee-jerk reaction is parity, but the other thing that I will concede here is that I've been drinking from a fire hose that is the city council for the last 3 terms, right? So I don't actually have an incredibly great idea of, like, outside of those meetings, what the life of a school committee member looks like. And so when people say like that, okay, no, it's a different ask, like, yeah, maybe that's right. I don't know. Like, I don't know either way. But what I will say, to Councilor Zaret's point, is that you can look at it either way, but just from my own experience, I kind of like flat cash raises, and the reason is, like, so I work at UMass, right, and I'm in the union at UMass, and so since my union contract was ratified, I've had, I believe, 2 raises. One of them was a cost of living adjustment that was X%, right? So, I'm staff, right? I'm not management or anything. I'm staff. I get paid. I mean, I'm not complaining about what I get paid, but there's people above me who get paid a lot more, right? So my pay went up by, let's say it was 2.5%. I forget what it was, and theirs did as well. But because they're paid 2-3 times what I did, the raise that accrued to them was 2-3 times bigger. And, like, sure, I'm sure that their bigger house takes more fuel to heat, so whatever, but, like, these are folks who are not, these are folks who in many ways, maybe it's not the best parallel to compared to these stipends, but, like, the people who are already being paid more getting bigger raises than the people who are already getting paid less does kind of give me the heebie-jeebies in some respects. So I think, I understand what Councilor Zaret is saying. I don't hate his proposal or anything, but I do there's a reason why I think that a flat increase, when you're already talking about a certain level of, like, a certain disparity, I just feel like to some extent that does make sense to me personally.
Thank you, Councilor Peak. I'm going to let the public participate first, and then we come back to the councilors. Anyone from the public want to participate in this discussion, public comment or questions for the councilors for this topic? Anyone through remote? I don't see any. Councilor Zaret?
The only thing I just wanted to, 2 things I wanted to comment on. One, in no particular order. One is that, and the chair can correct me if I'm wrong, but we are amending an ordinance, and so technically, I'm not recommending we do it now, but if a counselor wanted to recommend an amendment to the ordinance that recommends some sort of increase for every term or something like that, that's within the purview of amending an ordinance. I'm not recommending. Oh,
can I respond?
Keep going. Finish.
But the chair can correct me if I'm wrong, if he feels that the scope is specifically narrowed just to the actual stipend. The other thing I just wanted to say too, just to comment on what the speaker said before, is that I just want to clarify for the public that these, and again, I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but any potential increase does not increase our taxes. we only raise a certain amount of revenue every year, and then how the city actually has to, so the city's got to have to figure out how to budget. So I'm just going to make up a number. If the increase in city council and school committee salaries increases by $20,000, the city has to figure out where that $20,000 is going to come from by our already existing revenue. This would not result in tax increase. I just want to clarify that. That's it.
The only thing I would say to that, Councilor Zaret, is the charter is very specific about having a council deal with this the first year of the first term. I don't believe it would be legal for us to write an ordinance that suggests a future council would get a raise. And I would very much need a city attorney opinion. Also don't feel that it's different, just to say it's different from the mayor, because we were dealing with a 4-year term and we did incremental raises, but only within the term of that particular mayor's term. So there is a difference. So I don't think it would be legal for us to do that, but I'm not the lawyer. But in reading the charter, why would they put that in? And I want to emphasize something here. The charter said by December 31st, so that no council on December of 2023, before the council ends, can say, you know, we're all reelected, let's raise our salaries $20,000.
Right.
I mean, that could happen. So they wanted this to happen in the first year. And a couple of other comments before I move if it's okay with the president, continue the meeting. There's nothing to say that we can't do the next term. Hopefully, some of us are still here. Incremental increases. We did catch up with this $2,000 increase in a sense, as Councilor Peak was looking at. Next term, if we increase just $1,000, it's more relative because it's only been 2 years or 4 years, whatever you look at. So in a sense, you could do that. The other thing to think about is the lower income people that we might attract. There's no guarantee of that. We may get, unfortunately, 9 white men on the council again, which would be very disappointing to me because the salary attracts them. But we can't guarantee that. As a retiree now, I never considered, when I started on the council, I think we got, what did we get, Barbara? $1,000 or $500 back in 1996? I did it because I loved the idea of trying to help my city. But now as a retiree, when I retire from the council, I get $300 a month. I'm going to miss that, and it's sad, but I will. But, you know, that's just goes to lower income people doing this job. So I hear people that want to raise it to $7,000 or something else. So it's a struggle. And when I was referencing the taxpayers, they're the ones that hear this, and they get the perception, which is why I emphasized it's not for us, it's the next council. I wanted to make them well aware that we know what they're going through, but we also know how hard public service is, and that if we want to attract people to this very difficult job, where we get a lot of criticism, and we work hard, but we get a lot of difficult decisions to make, they might be more attracted if the salary was worth the effort. So I'm hearing all of that. That's all I have to say, and I'll continue the public hearing if there's no more comment.
Thank you, Councilor Reds. I think we should finish it now because we're going to have continuing this discussion for the next meeting. I will take a motion to continue this at the public hearing.
I move that we continue the public hearing for the amendment to Chapter 2, Section 217, and Chapter 2, Section 218 of School Committee and City Council salaries. Continue to the next meeting on October 16th.
Second.
November 16th.
November 16th. I'm a month behind.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continuing the public hearing of these 2 items. As you're going to remind the council, by then you have the opportunity to amend if you believe it is necessary. Councilor Zaret.
Just as a point of clarification, Mr. President, so I just, for the public and for the council, I had submitted, as is usually requested, just in writing, a recommendation for an amendment. Should I send that to the rest of the council then? What would be the best? Or,
Yeah, we can send it to the
okay,
council.
all right. Or if the clerk can distribute it.
Any other councilor? Barbara?
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item is to amend the Chapter 6, Section 6.1, storage of unregistered vehicles. Councilor Derby.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what we have in front of us is a request actually from the police department to clarify language in an existing ordinance that was ambiguous and has been used in court a couple of times to allow people to have more than one unregistered vehicle on their property by placing a tarp over it. Because when you place a tarp over it, you cannot see it technically, and that has been an issue that has arisen a few times. So you'll see in the new language, it basically placing a car cover, tarp, or other material over the vehicle in which the vehicle can still be identified as a vehicle is not out of sight for the purposes of this ordinance. So basically what it does is it clarifies that kind of ambiguity in the language and makes it so the ordinance is once again enforceable. So I'm happy to entertain any questions. For people's information, I believe we were all at committee when we voted this, so it passed 3-0.
Thank you, Councilor Derby. Any councilor have any questions or comment about this? Seeing none. Anyone from the public want to participate? Have any question? Councilor Denham?
Yeah, I just had a question. Who is impacted by this, right? So I guess my question is, are low-income folks impacted by this? Are small businesses impacted by this? Like, what's the who does this impact significantly?
Councilor Derby?
So the people that this would be impacting mostly are the people who live in neighborhoods with people who are, there's varying levels of, people having vehicles on their property, and some people have a ton of cars. As long as they're registered, there's no problem. But some people, say they're a hobbyist and they want to have a couple cars in their yard, maybe one out front, maybe on the side, and they get bored, they don't finish it, they just leave it. And so what we're talking about is we're actually talking about blight. And so what that does is not only does it degrade the experience of everybody who lives around that person, but it could create potential issues for the environment, for animals getting into the vehicles, and so this is a pretty reasonable fix. It does not affect small businesses. In fact, there's a piece of this that specifically exempts, mechanics. So if you have a shop, then this does not impact you at all. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I have another question actually. So the process, if I understand, is someone has something under a tarp and the police come and they can enforce that with a ticket. Prior to that, are they given a warning before that, or is it just an immediate ticketing kind of process?
So my understanding is that this is a process that happens over, at least historically, happens over a significant amount of time, where there's plenty of space for the person to rectify the situation. And in the past, that space has been taken up by just placing a tarp over the vehicle, which is not a reasonable solution. And so, yeah, I would say from what I know of the process, definitely a warning or two, and then a ticket would be issued.
Thank you. Councilor Riley?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on one other detail from what Councilor Derby was just mentioning, and it is that it's an insurance concept, but it also translates into a public safety concept, and that is that unregistered vehicles pose what's called an attractive nuisance, and that is when there are children or youth in the area that would see something like a vehicle that's unattended, and if it's there for a long amount of time, it then becomes attractive for play. And, this is an issue with insurance companies because, if these vehicles are unregistered or they don't have any insurance and they're just sitting on the lot, if somebody goes into them and plays with them and they injure themselves, then we open community members up to, costly litigation that wouldn't normally be covered by insurance policies. And the TARP doesn't specifically say this is not a vehicle that is just sitting here abandoned. So, there's that extra element of it at play that, there's no insurance that covers, liability injuries and things like that. So.
Thank you, Councilor. Anyone from the public that want to participate in this? I see Andrew.
Yes, thank you, President. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the police department, just to answer Councilor Denham's question about the process. Typically, once we get a complaint, we go out, we investigate it, and then the property owner is issued a notice, and that's the way that the bylaw is written. They're issued a notice where they have 10 days to rectify the problem. Then typically after that, we go back out and see what's been done with it. If nothing's been done at that point, then we can cite $10 per day after that. But typically, usually the 10 days is enough time for people to rectify the issue. And as long as the vehicle is properly housed, if it's put in a garage or out of sight or something like that, that is a rectification of the problem. But what we were having a couple of times is, we would get to the point we would have to cite, and we would go to court, and the court would say, well, technically it doesn't say anything about them not being able to just throw a tarp over it. And speaking to what Councilor Riley said, it poses potential issues, safety issues and stuff like that. So that's just the reason for this. We were having an issue when it went to court, and the court was basically saying our ordinance was not specific enough on that.
Thank you. Councilor Kosinski.
Mr. President, may I ask a question that I think can be answered by Officer Bolio? And that is, practically speaking, if someone has a vehicle and it's broken down and I'm trying to get it fixed and the part isn't in, and what am I supposed to do? I can't really move it to my backyard or to the owner's backyard. I would ask, first of all, does the police have a lot of flexibility or any flexibility on this? Because that would concern me if there wasn't flexibility. And assuming that there is flexibility, the next question I would ask would be, how many times is there a backyard to move to or a place out of sight that isn't currently being used that one could use? And then what's the alternative for the person who has a vehicle and they have to just do something with it? You can't cover it anymore. And not that I think covering it is a long-term solution, but I do commend the judge for looking at this and recognizing that this isn't in the ordinance. Officer Bolio, if I may.
Officer?
Mr. President.
Can I get in there, after them?
Officer?
Andrew.
Andrew?
Andrew there.
Can you hear? Sorry, Counselor. So to answer your question, the ordinance does allow for one unregistered vehicle per property. This is addressing matters of more than one. So, we'll have neighbors that call that say, I have a neighbor with, 5 unregistered vehicles sitting on the front lawn, and that's what this ordinance is trying to address. So somebody who's trying to fix a vehicle that they're trying to get back on the road or something, this is typically not applicable to that. The other thing is, even if they do have more than one vehicle that they're trying to fix, as long as all but one are registered and insured, it's not a problem. If they're registered and insured, this is not applicable. So this is really just unregistered vehicles that are not, more than one on each property.
the other part to the question was, is there often a backyard that could be used, that isn't being utilized, that could get utilized or does get utilized after your visit?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you personally, I haven't come across that yet where there hasn't been an area that they could move it to, or again, put inside of a garage or some sort of covering that it wouldn't still be seen. The whole issue with that's being edited here is basically people leaving it in the same spot and just throwing a tarp over it or something like that, which essentially doesn't solve our problem. But yeah, I haven't had any issues where there's nowhere to put the vehicle or something like that.
Because I'm envisioning a fenced area, perhaps, an area that is cars behind the fence. You can't really see it from the road. Okay, great. It's not a visual distraction or hazard to the public.
Yeah, I mean, if it's the way our ordinance is written is if it's out of sight and to a butters or people going by, then it's not really a violation of our ordinance. So that it would be fine if they had something like that. If they don't, I mean, that maybe they can find somewhere else to store it, or send it to a mechanic's garage or something like that if that's the issue. But again, this is addressing multiple vehicles. It's not somebody's single broken down vehicle in their driveway.
I'm glad to hear that. I don't have any further questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor. And I will ask to every single councilor if you can make all the questions at once. And I know probably we're going to be back again at the end. I'm going to ask the councilors so that way we can have a better understanding for the public who's talking. If you have multiple questions, can you please do it? And if the expert or the councilor was asking, forget about it, we'll do a follow-up. But I prefer that as a council president. Councilor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, and I felt this way when we were discussing it there really seems to be two separate kind of conversations going on here, like it's subtext at least. And one of the questions is, should we by ordinance prevent people from keeping multiple unregistered vehicles on the property? And then the other question is, should we amend our ordinance that does that to make it enforceable, right? And to me, that's sort of the key distinction, right? It's like, I have to admit, this is like maybe a little bit silly, like I have to admit there's just as somebody who grew up in like kind of a rural community, there's something about this whole thing like gives me like a weird discomfort because I grew up with a bunch of broken down cars in my house, like we lived far from the road. No one saw or cared. I wouldn't actually have been an issue under this, but just sort of there's something about this and, that sort of like, it leaves me kind of wondering like what was the mindset when this was written, what was the issue, like sort of to Councilor Denham's point, like what are we here to do? Why is this something that's important that we do? And I don't have it's such a weird edge case, like for somebody to have multiple unregistered vehicles on their residential property. But I do just want to say that is, I think there is that conversation, and maybe somebody wants to write something changing the rules around this, or I don't know, whatever. I mean, repeal it altogether for all I care. But I do think that what the specific thing is here is that we wrote it in a certain way that, and it is currently on the books, and it is not enforceable as written. So I sort of hadn't, and I don't regret this, the way that I went about this, but I didn't give a tremendous amount of thought in this particular process to whether this ordinance is the way that I would like to see unregistered vehicles being handled. That to me seems like a separate conversation, and this conversation is our ordinance as it's currently written enforceable? Now, somebody might disagree with me on that, and that's fine, but I do think that I've seen some of the questioning sort of lead into the direction of, well, is this ordinance fair, or is it really such a bad thing to do to have some unregistered vehicles on your property? And I'm not personally prepared at this exact moment to discuss any of that because I haven't really thought about it. But what I do know is that the law we have on the books is not currently enforceable, and that seems like a thing that perhaps we should consider changing. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Derby.
Thanks, Mr. President. I think I appreciate Tom's candor there. And, one of the things that I think that, because if we're trying to struggle for the rationale around the original ordinance, which, is already in place, we're just trying to make it enforceable, is this. It costs money to get rid of a car. And if we allow people to have unlimited unregistered vehicles on their property, then some people might be like, hey, you can just drop your car off at my place and I'll take the cash, and literally have junkyards in front yards of houses in Easthampton. I'm not saying that people would do that. I'm saying that they could do that. And that is a pretty strong rationale to have this ordinance stay in place. So.
Thank you, Councilor Derby. I'm going to ask one more time for the public if they want to participate. I don't see any. Yes, we have one. Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Dorothy Parker, 29 Grant Street, Easthampton. I'm just curious here because I don't know anything about this. If there's 2 cars with tarps on them, who's to know that those cars are unregistered? Are the police going to go in and lift up the tarp? How do we know that they're registered or unregistered? And as I say, that's a simple question, but I haven't heard the answer to it.
Councilor Derby, that was brought off to the committee?
Yeah, so this ordinance is complaint driven. So if someone complained about 2 vehicles being under a tarp at someone's house, the police would go to that house and they would ask if the vehicles were registered, and I believe that would be how they would find out. They would say, are these vehicles registered? Yes or no? And I think it looks like the chief might want to weigh in on that as well.
Thank you. Bob?
Good evening, councilors. That's spot on, Councilor Derby. It's we would get a complaint, and we get these complaints regularly. It's a broken windows theory issue. It's a public safety issue. It's a playground issue. It's a neighbor-to-neighbor issue. We get calls all the time from neighbors periodically that complain about basically junkyards next door. And this particular case came about because we did notice a resident, gave them 10 days. They threw a tarp over it. We went back. We didn't just cite them. We went back and said, that we don't believe that's sufficient enough. And that particular resident said, no, it is. And because nothing in the ordinance covers just covering it with a tarp. We all know it's an unregistered car, but it's covered with a tarp. So we sent a citation to him. He appealed. We wound up in front of the clerk magistrate court. Clerk magistrate, essentially what Sergeant Boyer said earlier, the clerk magistrate said that this isn't sufficient. The ordinance doesn't cover this, so they dismissed the case. So the neighbor, of course, was not overly thrilled that we couldn't enforce the tarp-covered car that he has to look at across the street from him. But yeah, so we give plenty of notice, and we don't just go out and cite even after the 10 days. We'll go back and try to work with folks to try to help them become in compliance. But the other part of it, and Councilor Derby hit the nail on the head, we don't want junkyards popping up all over the city where people are just paying their buddy to hold their car from Westfield to Easthampton because Easthampton doesn't have any regulations to throw a tarp on it. And you got 5 cars with a tarp on it, and somebody's collected $300 for that out of Westfield to move it to Easthampton. I don't think we want to get in the business of that either. So it's important, and I can't emphasize enough that we get these calls regularly with regards to uninsured motor vehicles. The council would be very surprised how often this actually occurs.
Thank you. And for the record, that's the police chief. In my screen, I just see his name, Bob, and I couldn't see his picture because it's really tiny. So just for the record, that's the police chief. Anyone
Thank
else?
you.
See, Councilor Denham?
Yeah. Okay, I'm not muted. So the only thing that I want to say is I support this. I understand it. Is it the right thing? I don't know, right? Is this what I would do? I'm not sure. I haven't studied this or researched it or anything or looked to see if there's better options. The only thing that I want to be clear about is I think that we live in very volatile times, and I can see neighbors using this as an excuse to kind of go after their neighbor, right? So I just want to be mindful of that this isn't, we're not creating an opportunity for people to kind of go after their neighbors for whatever reason, right? Whether it's I'm a hobbyist, it's December, it's snowing, my neighbor doesn't like me, I've got 2 cars I'm working on and I can't do anything with it until April or May, right? And so I think there's a lot of things a lot of scenarios that we could kick around. And so I just don't want this to suddenly become something that allows people to agitate one another.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kosinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was really sensitive to Councilor Peak's comments, and I really appreciate his saying that, well, geez, I grew up in the country and we had vehicles and they were out there and it just didn't bother people. And that makes sense. Listen, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I understand that people park their cars where they need to. And that's why I wanted to know from the officer what the scenario is and what alternatives there were, how many vehicles. And I think he answered those questions very well. I did want to point out, because I heard that maybe we shouldn't do this, but then, well, yeah, we could get 2, 3, 4, 5 cars more. They could come from out of town. We could have a junkyard. Well, I'll point out that if we have, to me, if you live in a residential neighborhood and we're not living in the rural area, we're living in a city. So that makes it different. And I think it's also different because if there's a commercial zone next to a residential zone or an industrial zone next to a residential zone, there has to be certain fences, a certain height, certain setbacks. And I think those are reasonable requests to have. And so if it's a residential and the next door neighbor's residential, you kind of have certain expectations. So I think we're doing it as best we can. I think it's right, and I think it makes sense, and I'd be supportive. But I do appreciate so much the discussion.
Thank you, Councilor. Before taking the motion, I saw it. Chief, do you want to add something before I take the motion?
I would, Mr. President. I'd like to say, first of all, that Councilor Kozinski is spot on. Part that we are in a city, we're not in the hill towns. Part 2 is I want to be clear that this is already enforceable. We already can enforce this. What we're talking about is a tarp versus having to move an unregistered car into a garage. So we can already enforce the excess of unregistered motor vehicles. What we're talking about is the end around by a resident by saying, oh, well, I threw a tarp over so you can't see anymore, so now you can't enforce it. That's all we're talking about. It is absolutely 100% enforceable. The only thing that we're discussing here is the end around of throwing a tarp over and saying, oh, it's a magic cloak, you can't see my car anymore, so you can't enforce it. That's what we're discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Derby?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I would like to move to amend Chapter 6, Section 6-1, storage unregistered vehicles prohibited, exceptions, penalty to include both residential and business locations, and by adding a subsection C to read, placing a car cover, tarp, or other material over the vehicle in which the vehicle can still be identified as a vehicle is not out of sight for the purposes of this ordinance, and a provision for written notice from the police department.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend Chapter 6, Section 6-1. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Barbara?
J.P. Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye. Motion passes. Councilor Sarek?
This one's easy, I think. The Public Safety Committee met in October, this is part of our October meeting, to discuss the new city quick actions. And of those items, we had a great presentation by Assistant Planner Webb. Of those items, item number 2 recommended placing the stop signs at Emerald Place and Dartmouth Street, as well as Emerald Place and Lincoln Street. We reviewed that. There were a few minor questions, stop signs versus yield signs, and it came down to these were the recommendations at the time. The committee recommended 2-0 to place, to make a recommendation to change our ordinances to have stop signs at both those locations. This was also reviewed with DPW Director and Chief of Police. That's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Councilor. I think so too. Any councilor have any questions, concerns, or comments? Anyone from the public have any questions or concerns or comment about this? Saying none. Councilor Sarek.
Wow. All right. At this time, in the form of a motion, I'd like to add to Appendix A of the City Ordinances, Traffic Rules and Orders, Article 7, Operations of Vehicles, Section 1-55, to add the 2 articles in proper alphabetical order. In accordance with the foregoing, the following are hereby declared to constitute isolated stop streets or flashing red signal locations, as the case may be: Dartmouth Street at Emerald Place westbound, Lincoln Street at Emerald Place northbound.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend the Appendix A Traffic Rules and Order, amend Article 7, Section 155. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Barbara?
David Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Motion passes. Before taking the motion to close this public hearing, I just want to remind the public and the council the 2 items in this public hearing is going to be continuing on November 16 at 6:15 in this chamber. And now we'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
Move that the public hearings be closed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close public hearing. Barbara?
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Munier.
Motion passes. Let's go to the agenda, communication from elected officials, boards, and committee. We have the Commission on Disability to talk about the winter accessibility presentation. I know we have Angelique here, and we have Eli. Which one is going to make the presentation?
I can talk first. I just had one quick question. Are you guys able to play it or?
No.
Okay. Are we allowed to play it or not really?
How long is it?
2 minutes.
Yes.
I don't know if Eli can do that because I don't know how to share it myself.
Yes, I will let you know. I will make you as a co-host. That way you can share it.
Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Angelique. I'm the chair for the Commission on Disabilities, and we are just coming to visit the City Council, and the people of Easthampton to talk about an issue that really affects everybody, but it affects folks with disabilities quite a bit. We did a survey a while ago. We just wanted to try to figure out what are the things that are affecting Easthampton, and we got quite a lot of responses in regards to snow removal and how that blocks people from going down the walkways. And I'm sure some of you have heard about, just trouble with sidewalks in general without the snow. So we wanted to make a public service announcement. I did my best. We wrote up a little thing and we went to the studio at Easthampton Media and recorded it, and they looked up some different images, some from the internet, some from Easthampton, some from Northampton. They put a little something together and we have the closed captioning. So I can't see, is Eli actually here? Because I don't see him on mine.
Yes.
Yeah, he's right here. Go to the
Okay.
if you're gonna talk, please.
Okay, so I wanted to show it really quickly. Is it working?
No.
Okay, could you, Eli, can Eli share it instead? Can you make him co-host?
Eli doesn't have a computer in front of him.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Okay, well, I can't get it to share, so,
Angelique, just one second. Councilor Rest.
I would suggest, Angelique, that you email the presentation to all the counselors and to the clerk. The clerk can put it on the website. You've spoken to it, and I think that's the best way to go from here, since it's a lot more difficult for you to present it. And that way we can really study it as well.
fantastic. So thank you for allowing me the time to come and talk to you about it. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll get that to you ASAP.
Thank you, Angelique.
Thank you.
Any other councilors have any communications? Councilor Rest?
I have two kind of related. First, I have a big thank you to Barbara Bombard for your incredible hard work on our elections. Not only do you and your team, Marianne and everybody, have to deal with early voting and mail-in ballots now, which is a good change, but you must also deal with unruly election fraud zealots who think that all clerks are somehow corrupt. You are far from that and an angel to election integrity. Be safe next week, please. And since the chief is on, keep her safe, Chief.
Thank you.
On another topic is hate and Mr. Elon Musk. And I have to say, this is disturbing to me because I'm a big free speech advocate. But the new free speech position on Twitter has opened the door to a massive increase in hate speech on that platform. Racism, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, homophobia is now allowed. Maybe the people of Easthampton should consider a different forum for stating their thoughts other than Twitter, which might affect Mr. Musk's bottom line, and that's the only thing he cares about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Rest. Any other councilors? Seeing none, let's move on. Mayor communication, Madam Mayor.
Good evening. I don't want to go over again, but I just feel like I want to clarify the last finance meeting and quote-unquote behavior. I'm not apologizing at all. I think asking for a written ethics opinion has been asked of myself and other elected officials. It's not because I'm picking on somebody. I really don't have the space in my head for that, never mind my heart and a soul. I think that the public deserves a written opinion. It's not an accusation. I think we all have thicker skin than that. But a written opinion from an ethics professional, not a verbal opine based on a phone conversation. Put it on record. That's what I meant. That's what I asked for. I will leave it there. I also find that Chair Rist is the chair of the committee. It's very clear in our rules. He moderates and directs the flow, and he announces who speak. Councilor Kwasinski's, and at sometimes my, speaking over the chair is inappropriate and against the rules of this council and the intent. I'd also like to speak on on behalf of some, actually 2 points. Hold on just a second, let me get them. Yeah, I'd like to speak on Ordinance Section 2-21, prohibition of single-use plastic bags and disposable food containers. I have 3 points. The first point is from the members of the retail, hospitality, and food industries, and the concerns that they brought forward around the heavy hits they've taken over COVID. They continue to. Labor, supply costs, and availability have really put the businesses and our local employees in precarious positions. The local sustainable economy has been a priority of residents, my office, and this council. And this ordinance puts additional cost and time for education as well as sourcing these items on businesses that cannot even open typical hours because of labor, but also the cost and availability of supplies. I agree with several of the business owners that reached out to me that the ordinance as written is counterproductive to a shared community commitment of local businesses and employees. While cold comfort to the community, the business community, I, in retrospect, should have considered this ordinance more carefully and would have vetoed it in its current form if I had done my due diligence. And I'm now obligated to be a part of the mitigation efforts to lessen the impact on businesses, but also residents feeling like they are properly recycling right now. Point 2, I request that the council reconsider the ordinance as written due to the barriers of compliance, thus defeating the intent of the ordinance. And I feel that extending the date of going into effect will not address the current barriers. PBI certified containers, as described in the ordinance, are the ideal. They are only compostable in a commercial composting facility, which none exists within our confines, and it appears none are available within our county. The containers, BPI containers, that are thrown into a recycling bin actually contaminate that the recycling batch. BPI certification is exactly those letters, BPI certification, and also says this can only be composted in a commercial facility. USA Trucking provides that recycling option for BPIs at an additional cost, but does not do so as a part of the recycling service that they offer now. There is no such facility that I could find accessible to residents to properly dispose of the containers that we are mandating our hospitality providers to buy. The idea that the residents would support this, I think, is very true, as well as the intent of the ordinance, but in fact, more harm is being done if things are improperly disposed of. Most biodegradable bags also do not degrade fast enough in ordinary landfills, compost, or recycle. In fact, if they are not exposed to the right amount of heat over the longer period of time, they can actually become more rigid. Most of the EPA regulations and opinions look at biodegradable bags as not degrading fast enough to actually meet the level or mitigate the level of harm if they were just thrown away. I would point out that residents and businesses right now do have readily available recycling programs to reuse containers within EPA guidelines using the recycle number system. My third point is around enforcement provision. I have asked to be put on the November 15th, 22 Board of Health meeting to speak of the burden of enforcement, the proper education campaign for staff in the health department, as well as in the public, and will ask to deprioritize the enforcement of this ordinance until a full community-based education program can be implemented and options for commercial composting are given at an affordable and reasonable option to both residents and businesses. This is an undue burden and mandate on a department which is not funded, and nor have we forecasted for in the next budget to take on BPI or commercial needed compost sites. I'm also asking that there must be new guidance given the better understanding of complexity of composting, biodegradable disposal, and recycling, and the difference of. While the ordinance, again, is in the best intent and one that I completely supported, absent myself doing due diligence, it does not consider the complexity of enforcement, and more so, it does not consider the harm if items are improperly disposed of with the same good intent. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor. Before the councilors, I just want to make a comment. I'm going to allow the councilors to make a question of clarification. This is not part of our agenda. I think this is a topic that we should discuss soon. I will allow any question for clarification of the mayor's position in this particular ordinance that she brought forward, the concern that she brought forward today. But I'm really concerned about the open meeting law. You're going to allow only the councilors to make questions for clarification. Councilor Rist?
It wasn't a question for clarification, just because it's not on the agenda. I would request that Councilor Derby place this item on the next agenda so it can be re-looked at, perhaps even suspending the ordinance and its enforcement until it is re-looked at. But it has to be, as President Gomez says, put on the agenda. So I'd ask Councilor Derby to consider that as chairman of the ordinance committee for the next meeting so that we can look at this again. Often we write ordinances with a great intent, and then the consequences are opened up once it is enforced. And as the mayor said, we all felt we have to do something about plastic, but there are some obvious consequences. So I'd ask that happen so that we can deal with this in committee at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Riley?
Yeah, I also support what Councilor Rist is suggesting. I think it's taken a while to get to this point to have this kind of a policy. I know that these conversations have been going on for a long time, and I don't think that there's any harm in waiting for a few more weeks to kind of take a closer look at this to make sure that everything is fair and equitable for everyone involved. I don't see that there's any harm in suspending the enforcement of the ordinance until we sort it out.
Thank you, Councilor. Any councilor have any questions for the mayor? Councilor Sarrett?
Just a comment that I know that there's been some questions coming in. I've been fielding questions from the health director, and so I understand some of the complications, and it's a matter of trying to find a place for good intent and maybe looking at what we have and figuring out how to make it work or work with that intention.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mayor. Response from the Councilor Kwasinski.
I just wanted to say that I agree that this should be discussed at another time. If we have any questions, I think we can independently ask the mayor, and when the matter is brought forth before the council in a public meeting where it's on the agenda, it can be discussed how we handle it. So I would reserve any comments at this time.
Thank you. I don't have any announcement. Vice President, you have something? No? Report of Standing Committee, Finance, Councilor Rist.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee will meet November 9th, that's next Wednesday, at 5 p.m. to deal with the tax classification, which is on our agenda, and I sent to the full committee. Nothing has changed in that, by the way. Also, we are meeting at 5:45 with the school committee finance. It's informative in that we are going to look at the school budget as part of the agreement that we all made back in June for the budget discussions. That is an informative meeting. No votes will be taken. It's just to find out all of the intricacies of the school budget as we move forward. So that's next Wednesday at 5 for the regular Finance Committee meeting. We'll be dealing with the $8,000 that's in new business as well. And at 5:45, a joint meeting with the School Finance Committee. At this time, I would like to make a motion to set a public hearing for the next meeting at 6:15 in these chambers for the annual tax classification.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to schedule a public hearing for our next meeting about the annual tax classification hearing request. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Barbara?
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
I also see a problem in that I need to ask for an extension of, I'm going to say 30 days for the annual tax classification. It has a 10/6/22.
No, I have it. 1/4/23.
1/4/23. Yeah.
So that's why we don't need it.
1/4/23.
Yeah, that was the date of
I
introduction.
don't understand that then.
The date of introduction.
That was when it was sent to committee. The second date is the 90 days.
We don't need it.
You don't.
January 4th is 90 days?
Yep.
Holy
We
cow.
don't need it.
I apologize, that's a senioritis moment. That concludes.
Thank you, Councilor Rist. Public Safety, Councilor Sarek.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met yesterday. The DPW director had a conflict and was unavailable. So the majority of our agenda items we weren't able to review, but what we then subsequently had time for was to discuss the Ordinance Review Committee's final report, and we were able to basically get through the entirety of that, with the exception of the final section, which did actually deal with some of the concerns that the Commission on Disability had discussed, which has to do with snow removal requirements on the sidewalk. So we'll have to, the prior committee's recommendations for that was to review with the Commission on Disability and potentially with the city attorney as well. So we'll probably discuss that at our next committee, but I'll likely circle back with the prior chair, our president also, between meetings as well, just to figure out the best course of action there. I did talk to the DPW director. I know there is great interest in the South and Main traffic light discussion. I know that there's some traffic counts that have come in, but those need to be properly analyzed, and that requires money, and we have to wait for free cash to be certified and then a appropriation request. So too, with further discussion of speed monitoring signs. We discussed the quick actions today. Our next meeting should be on Tuesday. I want to make sure I'm in the right year here, which I'm not. Tuesday, December 6th at 6 p.m. In room 1. That would normally be the fire department report, so I think we'll have them there, but BPW will also be there to discuss some of the above items, which are somewhat timely, and thus concludes.
Thank you, Councilor Sarek. Appointments, would have any report? Ordinance, Councilor.
Awesome.
Bless you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ordinance has not met recently. And just so people know, I was involved in a pretty significant, I had a significant injury. And so right now I'm trying to figure out how I can schedule the next meeting. And I'm gonna have to talk with Barbara and the other committee members to figure out exactly how that's gonna work. Because I have some limited mobility. So I don't have an exact date for our next meeting. And I know that we have a couple of things that are coming up. The one item that is remaining on our agenda, I've been working with the clerk, we still need to figure out how we're going to advertise that. And so I'm going to check in with the clerk on that just to make sure that doesn't fall by the wayside. But I hear what people are saying about the plastics thing. So, look for that to be coming on our next agenda, and also look for us to be setting a meeting, whether it's hybrid or whether it's all in person, is to yet be determined. So this concludes. I see Council Riley has a question. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Derby. Thank you, Councilor Derby. And I will suggest for the clerk to do both, like ordinance and the police safety, about the ordinance review committee, to post everything at the same time. Maybe that way we can save some money too.
Yeah, we got it.
Appointments, Councilor Riley, probably I missed that you want to schedule a meeting. That's what it is? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So we do have new business that will be sent to committee. So the next appointment committee will be November 10th at 5:30 p.m. So that's a Thursday in conference room B, which is in the basement. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have anything in property, rules, and government. Councilor Rist?
Yes, I sent to the council draft suggestions for the charter change for 3-9 and made significant changes in my original thoughts on that. There isn't a big urgency on this right now, so I'm going to wait until the Rules Committee has other business. It takes the state legislature a long time to adjudicate these kinds of things, and I believe it's something that we should talk about. But I want to reiterate to the public, I have no reason to think our current mayor is vacating her position. So please don't read into this. It's just me trying to catch up with charter changes I've been involved with for 15 years. So thank you. That concludes.
Thank you, Councilor Rist. We don't have no business or anything pending. We have new businesses. Councilor Rist.
I'll make a motion to send the 2 new mayoral appointments to Appointments Committee for review.
A second.
We have a motion and a second to send the 2 mayoral appointments to the Appointments Committee to review. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Barbara?
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Motion passes.
I'll make a motion to send to the Ordinance Committee the safe and fair access to legally protected reproductive and gender-affirming healthcare services request to the Ordinance Committee for review. Somebody has to.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to send the ordinance amendment request at section 623, safe and fair access to legally protect reproductive and gender affirming. Any further discussion? Councilor Rist?
Yes, I was originally going to oppose this because I fear that it is something that we should allow the state to do, but I know that the Ordinance Committee has the ability to move toward a resolution to the state, that the state can legislate. I think the issues that Councilor Zaret brings up are important enough that the state ought to be dealing with this and not locally. And I point that out because the liability for the First Amendment is dangerous for us, and that the last ordinance that was submitted cost our very limited city council budget $3,000. So because of the nature of this ordinance, it will have to have that kind of adjudication, and I fear it will cost a great deal. And a resolution is the opinion and will of the council and does not need legal review. So I'd just like the Ordinance Committee to consider that as you look at this ordinance. Thank you.
Councilor Zaret?
I would just refer, without getting into too much detail, I would refer the council to the memo I sent out earlier on this topic. I can catch you up, Councilor Rist.
Any other councilors? Barbara?
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
All right.
Motion passes. Councilor Rist?
We have an interdepartment transfer. I'll do a first reading. The amount requested is $8,000 to be transferred from the Veterans Cash Benefit Account, $8,000 to be transferred to the Veterans Cash Benefit Account, $8,000 for the following purpose: to provide vote to pay prior fiscal year bill for veteran services out of current fiscal year 2023 budget. I move that this be sent to the Finance Committee for review and be set for public hearing for November 16th in these chambers.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to send to the Finance Committee to the interdepartmental transfer of $8,000 for the veteran service all bill and to schedule a public hearing. Our next meeting at 6:15 in this chamber. Any further discussion? None. Barbara?
Connie Denham.
Aye.
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Yes.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Motion passes. Look like if we do everything on our agenda, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We need a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. And Barbara?
Salem Derby.
Aye.
Omar Gomez.
Aye.
JP Kaczynski.
Aye.
Dave Munier.
Aye.
Tom Peak.
Aye.
Brad Riley.
Aye.
Dan Rist.
Aye.
Owen Zaret.
Aye.
Connie Denham.
Motion passes. Have a great evening, everybody.
Yes.
See you, Connie. See you, Salem. See you, JP.
Do we have
See
to
you,
sign?
Riley.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.